Hello, everybody. This is Adam Levin here on the Extra Point podcast. Normally, this would be Andrew Goldberg in this role, but he went down to Baltimore to cover some kind of lacrosse thing with some coaches or something like that. So I will be on hosting duties here. My name, again, is Adam Levin. I do the NFC North for Fox Sports Digital. This is, of course, Zachary Benau, my colleague who does the AFC South for Fox Sports Digital. You can get in touch with him at Zachary Benau on Twitter. For myself, you can get in touch with me at Blue Collar God. You can also look at my Sporting Mind of Adam Levin page on Facebook or on Blogspot. And, of course, this Hangout and my NFC North stuff for Fox, including some original content galleries, which Zach does himself. And Zach does you do some interesting ones, too, of course, because you kind of have to, I guess, with that division. So I give you props. You have a hard division to make interesting, and you do a pretty good job. I mean, I check out all of our colleagues' letters and galleries, and Zach, you do one of the better jobs with that. And I know that's tough with that division, but yeah.
I try to just to touch on free agency and get people potentially excited about certain players. But,
right,
it's not easy when you kind of know your potential, Jacksonville Jaguars aren't going to be signing like DeMarco Murray to save the day.
Right, exactly. And you know that a lot of those teams are in rebuild mode, and it's going to be a long process for some of them. We talk a lot about our divisions, obviously, for those of you who have stuck around with us here on the Extra Point podcast and watched us. And we want to talk a little bit about the championship games that were. They both involved teams in our division, but most importantly, they're pretty good games. Well, one of them was a good game. We should start with that one, the NFC championship game, which featured a team from my division, the Packers, who had a 16-point lead at one point, a 16-point lead and blew it. That was the third largest. Seattle, who won that game, it was the third largest comeback victory in a conference championship game, and it was miserable for a lot of reasons. I can talk a little about the Packers with that, obviously, but Zach, I mean, do you have any questions about how that game went down from like a Packers fan standpoint?
I'm kind of curious what Packers fans are thinking. One of my best friends, who I grew up with from the time I was 5 years old, lives in New York now, is a diehard Packer fan, always has been. And his main thing with the game, which I never realized watching the Packers all season, I just figured they were good, but his main thing, and he says it's been going on all season, so you can let me know if I'm right about this, or he's right, is Mike McCarthy is the issue there. And he's saying, which I think most people can agree with, Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback in the league. And McCarthy doesn't get any fault or blame because, they're going to win 11, 12, 13 games every year having Aaron Rodgers. But, he's been an issue all year long. And, watching that championship game, he was clearly a big reason why they lost going forward, not throwing the ball and playing, fairly soft. So do you have, what's Packers fans' opinion of Mike McCarthy? Do they hate him as much as my buddy does?
Yeah, he's got a very interesting reputation for a guy who, just this year, there was a graphic, actually, when the Packers beat the Alliance, that it was his sixth consecutive playoff appearance as a Packers coach, which broke Lombardi's streak of 5 consecutive playoff appearances. But let's be honest here. Is Mike McCarthy Vince Lombardi, or does he just have Aaron Rodgers? I think it's because he has Aaron Rodgers that they've made 6 consecutive playoff appearances. He's not necessarily that liked in Green Bay. He's a lot of Packer fans think that he's kind of a Teflon Don because of those playoff appearances and the Super Bowl ring, and also the fact that, with a publicly owned team where, Ted Thompson has some powers to fire and hire guys, but it's a weird situation because it's a publicly owned team that it's very hard for them to get rid of people, even though they do it. And usually guys, especially if they win, are pretty Teflon there. And he is a skeptical play caller. He does a lot. A friend of mine who's a Packers fan says that he does a lot of the a lot of his play calling is like Madden style, like run, run, pass, or pass, pass, run, or very obvious kind of patterned play calls where like the opposition kind of knows what type of a play it's going to be, maybe not which running play or which passing play, but they know it's going to be a passing play or running play consecutively, or it's going to be a 2-2-1 pattern or whatever. It's predictable, basically. And yeah, you're right. I mean, Mike McCarthy has a lot of criticism about him, not just about that game, but just in general for his play calling, and that was definitely a very conservative game plan. I mean, they barely let Aaron Rodgers throw, even though Eddie Lacy was playing well. There should have been some times where they had Rodgers throwing the ball on second and third down in that second half. That was one of the things I noticed. I noticed there were kind of four things that led to that loss, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, just watching, like, even after they got the interception with 5 minutes to go and the guy slid down, which is a whole different story whether he should have slid or not, just kept running.
Yeah, Tremont.
But immediately after that, up by 2 scores. I mean, granted, you're up by 2 scores, but you have the best quarterback in the league, and to run 3 straight running plays and to give Seattle the ball back within, with using all their timeouts, give them the ball back within 20 seconds was just a complete waste. Like, I think you got to throw the ball at least once there. And to touch on what you're saying, like, the predictability, it is predictable with him. And, like, he goes first and goal, like, at the 8, and then he runs it, and then he gets no yards, and then he's going to throw it the next 2 times because they're not going to run it on second goal from the 8, third and goal. So they're looking for the pass. And then to go back and question his play calling, the 2 times they got inside the 1 and had the 4th down, and like you mentioned, Lacy was running well, and he was running pretty well that game. They took the 3 points twice.
Yeah.
And, like, you got to go for it. I think just in the playoffs, you got to go for it.
Yeah, you could make that argument. I don't condemn or think that that's a bad argument. I personally don't think that that's really what swung the game. I think there's a few things that kind of were leading to that collapse, and that was actually not one of them. And I mentioned that before I asked you the question, but here are kind of what I thought it was. It was the second half in general of being a little too tight and kind of not mixing it up enough and being too predictable and should have thrown a little more. That's one. 2, you also mentioned it was, and this isn't necessarily in consecutive order, 2 was Tremont Williams with about 5 minutes left picking off the ball for Russell Wilson's 4th pick and sliding down when he actually, if you look at the All-22 film, he had daylight in front of him. He could have scored or at least gotten to the 1, and even if they kick another field goal, it would have been 22 to 3 or whatever, or 22 to 7, and it would have been a whole different ball game. And that was a big one. Tremont Williams sliding was a big one. Another big shift of momentum. And this happened a little earlier. Was that special teams touchdown? That started to kind of start the momentum sway when John Ryan threw the touchdown pass to Gary Gilliam. And I think that if the Packers would have been more open to thinking to themselves, hey, you know what? And this comes into McCarthy, obviously. McCarthy should have known that, well, first of all, Carroll's a risk taker. Second of all, what does Seattle have to lose? They're down 16-0 at home in the NFC Championship game as the defending champs. They got to get something going. They haven't done anything on offense all day. The Packers defense, which the saddest part of this is that the Packers defense was so bad the last, couple minutes where they gave up touchdowns on 3 straight possessions that it's going to undermine what was essentially a really good defensive day, what I thought was an underrated unit all year, which is the Packers defense. But that's neither here nor there. It's, the Packers should have known the way they were controlling the game. They should have been able to watch out for a special teams fake. And they didn't, and they let John Ryan throw that touchdown. That started to swing the game. Obviously, those three straight touchdowns on 3 straight possessions started to swing the game. I think an underrated the Brandon Bostic bobbled onside kick is probably what broke the levee and started the forward momentum, because that gave the Seahawks back the ball after they were stopping the Packers and they were inching closer, and you started to feel the momentum sway, and that was just, huge. There's one other one. I wrote about it, but I'm forgetting it, of course. Perfect time to forget it, right? But what comes to mind, those are the things that really, started to swing here's what I was going to say. Sorry. Here's what I was going to say is Clinton-Dix, getting back to the defensive performance, Clinton-Dix played well all year long as a rookie. He was a standout rookie this year for the Packers. He had incredible plays in the NFC Championship game. He had 2 of Russell Wilson's 4 picks. He had a couple big tackles. He had a couple big tip-aways. He played great. On that 2-point conversion, when it was 20-19.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
And Clinton-Dix didn't tip away that ball. Because if he tips away that ball and everything else happens as it does, Green Bay drives down the field, kicks a field goal, and Green Bay wins 22-20. They would have won. That field goal wouldn't have tied the game and brought it to overtime, where you knew Seattle was going to win. You just knew it, especially when they received the kick. Maybe you can say momentum's fraudulent or not, but the team had it going. You could sense the Packers were a little like, how did this happen? And when he didn't tip away that 2-point conversion, that's when I said to myself, even if Green Bay ties he should have tipped that ball away, and that might have been the biggest play that a lot of people are talking about, but that might have been bigger than anything else. But, you said that's what you thought. Obviously, you agree that 2-point conversion was big.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Obviously people are touching on it, but because there were so many collapses in that game on the Packers side, and because of, the big play, like you mentioned, the fake field goal for the pass and, the onside kick that the guy dropped, people aren't talking about the 2-point conversion, but Russell Wilson went back 20 yards and just threw it up, and the guy was right there. And all he had to do was knock it down, and, it's a whole different story because, obviously you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe they play it a little differently, Seattle, because they're trying to prevent a touchdown instead of a field goal. But, man, he's got to knock that ball down. And that was a huge play in that game. And then once it went to overtime and Seattle got the ball first, Green Bay's defense was spending all that time on the field in the second half, especially the last 5 minutes of that game. And you knew Seattle was going to go down and score with all the momentum and the home crowd and everything.
And they were emotionally spent too. For the first 3.5 quarters, you couldn't have asked for a more impressive defensive game plan from Green Bay. They contained Russell Wilson up until the last few minutes of the fourth quarter. They were containing Marshawn Lynch. That Seattle offense couldn't do a thing. It was you looked at Green Bay, you're like, is this the Seattle Seahawks defense? They were making plays on every ball. You couldn't have asked for a better defensive, game plan. And then they, whether it was being tired, nerves, not being able to close, whatever, and like you said, you just knew that after all that had happened within the final 5 minutes, after they played so well on defense, you knew that defense, if they had to defend first, mentally, energy, you kind of knew you were going to see Seattle do something.
They were emotionally and physically drained at that point, and that's natural, being on the field for that long, especially at the end. And, it's also Marshawn Lynch is a total beast, just running over people. That guy is a strong man. Eventually he is going to wear you down a little bit, which is natural. But they shouldn't have been in that position, or they should have had a big enough lead where, even if they get wore down a little bit at the end, it wouldn't have mattered. But so goes it.
That you think it was a wasted, great defensive performance by the Green Bay defense? Wasn't that the story going into the fourth quarter? Wow, Green Bay's defense is impressive. If they get to the Patriots, watch out.
I completely agree, and it's all about Green Bay's offense all year. It's supposed to be the best offense against the best defense, but if you look at the game, Green Bay's offense didn't really do anything. They kept getting the ball at Seattle's 30-yard line, so they were only getting field goals, and then when they get in the end zone, they were only driving 20, 40 yards. They weren't driving 90-yard things and just destroying their defense. So Seattle's defense was what it always was, super strong. Right. Another thing I want to mention was, and this goes back to McCarthy a little bit too, as good as Richard Sherman is, the guy is playing with one arm. You can literally see him holding one arm like it's in a sling and I don't think they threw at him one time.
They did, and he picked it off.
But that was early. He picked it off, like in the first quarter. But not after.
After that, they didn't go to him.
But not after he hurt his arm. And it's like, I understand he picked off the first one, and then they didn't want to go after him again, and they were, lining up other guys against him. But I would line up Nelson or Cobb against Sherman once the guy clearly, they must have seen that, he only had one arm. Everyone on TV kept showing it. Someone in the booth could have pointed out. I think you got to attack the guy. How fast was he running? Could he lift his other arm up to knock a ball down? And they didn't go after him once. And that goes back to McCarthy, who continued to run the ball, and didn't attack someone who's clearly injured. And that's just sports 101. You go at the guy, who has some sort of, physical ailment against them. And they didn't go after him at all. So I thought that was really weak. At least make an effort, and then, if you see he's back and can put his arm up, whatever, then you don't have to go back to it. But just to continue to go away from that when the guy's playing with one arm, I think, you got to be more aggressive in those situations. They played the whole second half not to lose instead of the whole second half to win the game.
Right, and it's not just you're right about that, and I said it myself about the second half especially, that and it's not even just that they didn't throw at an injured Richard Sherman. Earl Thomas was already injured by the second half, and they were still running the ball, which is fine. You need to run the ball, but now Rodgers has Thomas, who's, as we both know, maybe as important as Richard Sherman for that Legion of Boom, maybe the most important guy, and one of the best safeties in the NFL, and he's hurt, and Richard Sherman's hurt. That's two incredibly productive and impactful members of the Legion of Boom hobbling a little bit with their arms, which is what they make a living using to knock down and intercept balls. Go after them. I mean, I'm not saying that that Thomas and Sherman won't be able to get in front of balls. They're competitive. Right. They're good. They're good DBs. They're probably still going to get in the way of balls, but with only one arm for each of them, they're not going to be as effective. Why don't you just throw at them? You're absolutely right.
And we didn't even see them tested, so we don't even know if they would have put their arm up or what would have happened. Well,
maybe they would have gotten their body in the way. I think Sherman and Thomas could have made maybe they get their body in the way here and there, but I think they would have been hampered because how can you not be? And right. Even if they get in the way of a ball with their back or something, or do something kind of incredible with one arm, for the most part you're going to be able to complete balls on them, or you're going to be able to put more pressure on guys on Maxwell or on Chancellor, because now that they're the healthy guys, maybe you think to yourself, all right, well, let's go away from them and just put all the pressure on the healthy guys because they won't have any help or something, mix it up a little bit. That's why the second half really infuriated me, because by the second half with the injuries and stuff and the fact that you were seeing that you were not able to help your defense out on offense, so help your defense out who's playing great, and take some chances with Rodgers. If Rodgers doesn't have a ball, throw it away. Don't get picked off, but also just take some shots, put pressure on their secondary.
Right, and it's not like you're taking this huge risk, you're throwing it with Kyle Orton. You're playing. You're still the best quarterback in the world that you're taking these risks with. So you got to assume that the guy can make a pass where he knows it's not going to be picked off. Yeah, sometimes he gets picked off, just like everybody does, but you're taking a risk with the best quarterback, not with, some awful quarterback, and you're okay, we're up 63, just have to run the ball, we're lucky to be here. You got the best quarterback in the world, so just go after it.
And it's sad that it undermined the defense. I mean, look. Against any other team, the Packers have a defensive performance like that on the road against any other team that's not Seattle, and Green Bay's probably making that team pay, and it's a blowout, and you're looking at the Packers wow. If the Packers were to get into the Super Bowl and Green Bay was doing that to New England for 3.5 quarters, and the Patriots had a little cushion, I mean, wow. But, this game's obviously been beaten into the ground by us and by the media before it. So before we kind of talk a little bit about Seattle and then move to the AFC Championship game and move on, let me just kind of put a bow on the Packers season. And then I think there's some stuff that happened with the Bears that I think you had some questions about, including their hirings. But the Packers, the bow on their season is basically that the defense was something that was really overlooked most of the year. It was a pretty bad unit. It was a pretty bad unit after September. By the time October started, it was among the worst in a lot of categories. Got better each and every month as the year went on. It was really underrated from November on. In fact, advanced metrics-wise, it had better efficiency than the offense did. And I think that the NFC Championship game kind of encapsulated what the team had at least been since November, which was they were kind of running the ball a lot and playing a lot of defense, where Rodgers was being a little more conservative because the second half numbers dipped, but the reason they were winning was the defensive running game were actually better than people who didn't follow the team knew. Another year where they win the division, and another year where they come up short before the Super Bowl. Another year where the 2010 Super Bowl gets further and further in the rearview mirror without any repeat performance of at least getting back there. But other than that, another good year for the Packers. The NFC North will be competitive next year, especially with some of the stuff that the Bears did. But we'll see about them. And the Vikings are my big surprise team. And I think Detroit has a good coaching staff. And yeah, I guess that's kind of my end of the road there with the Packers in the NFC North. Zach. I meant to ask you, what did you did you have any questions about the Bears in terms of like the NFC North offseason stuff? We never really got to talk about it last week, and as you know, they hired John Fox and they hired Adam Gase as their offensive coordinator, who worked with Brandon Marshall in Denver, and yeah,
I'm very impressed with the Bears hiring. I think they came out better than anybody, honestly, of all the teams hiring coaches. And you can, I don't know how Chicago media thinks of, their hirings, and I know they're obviously, very passionate and, they will basically complain about anybody, but Adam Gase seems like a great, obviously had faith in Manning, but, has the history in Chicago. John Fox has been a great head coach. And then what's most impressive with me is their defensive coordinator, Fangio, who, in my mind, is one of the best defensive coordinators in the whole league, and probably could have got a head coaching position or should be up for a head coaching position somewhere. So to grab him, I think they got three great coaches. Whether that translates into Cutler, not throwing interception anymore, and still have to improve your defense. Like you can hire the best defensive coordinator in the world, and if you don't have the players, it's not going to matter. But I feel like they really improved on the coaching side of the ball. Do people in Chicago feel the same way, or are they still a little skeptical because they don't know, maybe don't know the names as well?
No, people in Chicago are excited. So are players. So are former players who were hating on the organization. Brian Urlacher. Brian Urlacher has been very loud. So was Mike Ditka this year. Very loud about their displeasure for Mel Tucker, who's obviously fired, and for Mark Trestman, who's now the offensive coordinator of the Ravens, the former head coach, and they were tired of Phil Emery, and the Bears were getting run by a lot of their former players and coaches, but now those guys are coming out and saying, oh, good job on John Fox, good job on Adam Gase, good job on Vic Fangio, so are the fans. No, people are really excited about it, and I think you're right. I mean, very, very good hires. Look, John Fox is 0-2 in Super Bowls, but he's still taken two different organizations to the Super Bowl in two different conferences. He's a very, very good coach. The coordinators couldn't be better. Gase is a great coordinator. So is Fangio. Fangio did wonderful things with that talented defense in San Francisco, as you know, being a Niners fan. I still think Jay Cutler is a coach killer, but I do think that this organization is going to get rid of Jay Cutler before they get rid of Fox, because I kind of think that the media and the organization kind of know that if it doesn't work this time, it's not going to be because of Fox. It's going to be because of Jay Cutler. So, because this is actually the first time in decades that they've hired that they've made a coach out of someone who had no prior head coaching experience. So they're going to know whether it's Cutler or not after this. And they also like Ryan Pace, their new general manager. So the honeymoon phase is officially on in Chicago.
Yeah, and just real quick on Chicago before we move on. I think, listen, I like what they did. I think, they can attract players, obviously. They got the money. They have, they have the fan base. They have the city. I think, honestly, their biggest problem is the division they play on. Their division's becoming real tough. Obviously, you have the Packers. They're
Yeah.
getting better. You have Detroit, who, made the playoffs, and, we could argue that they should have beat the Cowboys. And
Right.
then you have the Vikings, who are very much played a great season without Adrian Peterson and going through all of that from week 2. So that just might be their downfall, is they got a real tough division to compete in.
No,
But
no,
other than that, I like what they're doing, but just the division's real tough.
no, I agree with you. Look, I mean, first of all, they're the one team in the division that needs to completely overhaul themselves because they had one of the oldest defenses and one of the worst defenses, so they need to totally redo that. They have some young talent and guys like Brock Farine and Kyle Fuller, and now they have to build around those young kids in the secondary. And the offense will be in good hands in some ways because Brandon Marshall knows Adam Gase, but they need a few upgrades on that end, and they need to really seriously think about going forward with Jay Cutler, unless Gase can turn him into Peyton Manning. But yeah, no, the optimism's good, and you're right. The division did get tougher because the Vikings were the best 7-9 team. Nobody talked about it. I mean, because they weren't on national TV a lot, nobody knew. But covering this team, I got to tell you, last 2 months of the year, they were one of the toughest outs in the NFL. They played everybody hard. They're young, very talented, and there's a lot of optimism going forward, especially because Bridgewater's good. Lions have a good coaching staff, and I think that if they can get at least Nick Fairley or Ndamukong Suh back, one of those guys, and build up the offense a little bit, they'll be fine. And the Packers are the Packers. So yeah, you're right. It's becoming, the NFC North is going to become a brutal division again in the next few years. But I think that with Fox there, and I think that with this new ownership, Bears fans are noticing that the ownership actually wants to win and not just penny pinch. So a lot of Chicago fans think that even if next year is disappointing, that if they can kind of see that it's Jay Cutler and maybe Gase and Fox can go into a better quarterback class and get a better quarterback from another draft class, that Chicago can be on its way quicker than it would have been with Trestman. So there you go. There's the NFC North. But enough of that game. We'll get back to Seattle a little bit later when we preview the Super Bowl. But let's go into the AFC championship game. We can talk a little bit about the Colts and Raptor division up later, but obviously the big story is Deflate-gate, Zach. I think it's a overhyped media story, but I just went on a whole soliloquy about the NFC North, so I want your opinions. What do you think about this whole Deflate-gate situation?
I mean, I think it's way overblown. It's an issue because it is cheating. Whether it made a difference or not, obviously the 42-7 score would not have mattered whether the ball was inflated, deflated, whatever it was, whether it was a pound too light or a pound too heavy. That doesn't matter. And everyone on the Colts side and everyone in the NFL knows that the score was not affected because of that cheating.
It wasn't right. It wasn't the ball that blew out the Colts.
No, but it was cheating, and that's why this is becoming such a big story. And it's even a bigger story, in my opinion, is because this has happened not this exact story, but this has happened before with the Patriots. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Belichick already got cheating once on the Spygate situation, and now we're going to Deflate-gate, it's like, well, what else have they been doing? So you're trying to get to the bottom of it, and then it comes out that 11 of the 12 balls were deflated. So clearly it wasn't an accident if every single ball was deflated except for one. It's more like what happened to that one ball rather than what happened to the 11 balls. and now we're at the point of everyone's lying to us. So now people are getting more annoyed. So I think that's why it's becoming a bigger and a bigger and a bigger story, because obviously Brady just lied out of his teeth at the press conference yesterday. Belichick is Belichick, who always claims he doesn't know what's going on. And the NFL is being the NFL and not punishing anybody for it. So the story is going to continue to go as long as there's no punishments or there's nothing, there's no closure to the situation. And this is something the NFL does that every other major sport doesn't do. If any other major sport, something happens, you see, especially in baseball, someone gets busted for, PEDs or corkage on the bat or too much pine tar, they're suspended within 24 hours or money's taken away or fine, something. The NFL kind of just sits there and waits. So, of course, the story keeps getting dragged on and dragged on and dragged on. And now they're like, oh, we're not going to have a decision until after the Super Bowl. So what do you think is going to be talked about all the way up to the Super Bowl? The same thing. And then after the Super Bowl, once the decision comes down, what do you think is going to be talked about? So, I mean, if they want to get past the story, they need to just come up with a punishment and then try to get the story back to Seattle and New England, which is what it should be on for these next 2 weeks. So, I don't know. It's a whole lot about nothing, in my opinion. Yes, Brady obviously is deflating balls. Is he the only person doing it in the NFL? Probably not, considering other quarterbacks who have retired have already come out and been like, oh, yeah, I always had them deflated a little bit. So something needs to happen with this, and the NFL needs to do something. You know, I don't think they need to do something drastic, like people are saying, like suspend Belichick for the whole year. But I don't know. You know, fine them, take away a draft pick, and then move on, because we should be concentrating on the Super Bowl, not like, you know, half a pound out of a football that, you know, Brady is able to throw.
Wow. You're tough to follow, because I must say I agree with I agree with pretty much all of it. Look, you're absolutely right. We're only talking about this. This is only a story because it's this team that has had a history of skirting the law or doing shady things, and people wonder, well, what else have they done? And they're also the current dynasty of the era, and anytime you're the current dynasty of an era and are always competitive or always – they've been to 9 AFC championship games since 2001, 6 Super Bowls, won 3 of them. They've won the division 12 out of those 14 years that they've been on this dynastic run, and they're a little intellectually superior, holier-than-thou, mocking, you know, perception and kind of reality. They're cocky. Brady has a supermodel wife, yada, yada, yada. They're and, you know, like you said, they've had a bit of a resume of this. So, of course, they're going to make it a story. If this happened in the San Diego-Kansas City game, it would not be a story. And you're right. Everybody does this. I mean, come on, this is pro sports. Like, in much more, in places that actually affect our real lives, like Wall Street and the technology industry in terms of, you know, those big businesses, guess what? They cheat too. They steal things too. That's what happens in competitive industries. Do I think it's right? No. But I think it happens. Do I think that it's as bad as, say, if it came out that the Patriots were stealing people's playbooks? Then I'd have a big problem with the Patriots. If they were doing things like stealing people's playbooks or, you know, spying on people's signals and actually legitimately doing things like that, then that's one thing, okay? But deflating a football, who cares? LeGarrette Blount ran the ball for 3 touchdowns and over 130 yards. Hey, Colts, why don't you just stop that? And I know nobody's saying, like you said, nobody's saying that that's the reason the Colts lost, because we all know they lost 45-7. Okay, they got blown out. They were the most fraudulent team in the Final Four, and we all kind of knew it. And they hadn't been able to beat the Patriots before. But you know, it's just I think it's just ridiculous. I think you're right. I think it's a stupid story, and I think it's controversy over nothing, but it's only because it's this team, and I can't believe it's getting mainstream news coverage. Don't we have other things to talk about, like the State of the Union and, you know, ISIS and things that are a little bit more important? Instead, you're talking about Deflate-gate on CNN and Good Morning America. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. We are bringing it up because it's a big topic, and it's interesting to get our takes on it. But I, like you, I've tried to ignore this story as much as possible, even though it's hard to do. Can't even imagine what Andrew's going through with the Patriots being one of his teams. And
yeah, I mean, I've actually, you know, this week struggled a little bit with the Colts because I was like on the fence every week with like how much, because it affected them, you know, directly because it was against the Colts that this happened. So I was like, in all my newsletters, I didn't know how much Deflate-gate to put into the stories. It's the main story, but are we sick of it? Our Colts fans don't want to hear about it because it happened against them. It's like, it's a really, you know, it was iffy all week for me, touch and go, because I was like, how much Deflate-gate do we need?
That's how it was for me for collapse in the second half Packers. But, you know, there were so many stories on that with the Packers, and I actually, you know, looked and saw that those were actually trending well because people like to relive their movie, I guess. But, I absolutely get it. And, you know, it's going to eventually go away. But you know what I find interesting about this Super Bowl? this 24, if you include like, this around this time, or not around this time, let's say from about March of 2014 to now, the NFL has had one of the worst, PR years, both on and off the field, I can remember. And I mean, the whole first month of the season couldn't have been more irrelevant because of all the domestic abuse stuff. There was more saturation points and more people getting, fed up with arrests in the off season, and more light being shown on that, more lights being shown on the concussion stuff. Then like I said, you have the whole first month of the season disappearing to the Ray Rice stuff, and then during games you're having controversies with refs and too much stuff being called or not called. Then you have playoff games like Dallas-Detroit with a flag pickup and controversy. Then you have Des Bryant controversy in another NFC playoff game. Then in another playoff game, you have Deflate-gate and stuff like this. And now you have two teams that are so polarizing. The Seahawks have had Adderall suspensions. They've had PED suspensions. Pete Carroll had his own shady stuff going back to USC. Seattle is a team that a lot of people who are not in Seattle love to hate. New England is a team that a lot of people outside of Boston love to hate. They're a team that has a lot of holier-than-thou cheating stuff with it. I mean, PR-wise, I've never seen a year this bad for the NFL, and I think it's incredibly fitting, almost like it's hilarious, almost like it was planned. It's fitting that it's these two polarizing teams that couldn't be worse from a PR standpoint, especially now the Seahawks with Marshawn Lynch that are in the Super Bowl. The NFL must be besides themselves in terms of that aspect, even though it'll get good ratings.
Right. Well, and ultimately the NFL, just like every other corporation, they care about the money. And, no matter who's in the Super Bowl, no matter what, the NFL is the biggest sport in America, and they're going to continue to make the money. But, yeah, they do. I mean, Marshawn Lynch goes out, tweets today that he's embarrassed to work for the NFL.
Yeah.
Like, that cannot be good for the NFL from a standpoint that you have someone sitting there who makes, God, I don't even know what his contract is, but whatever he's making, millions and millions of dollars, and he's embarrassed to work for you, and he's tweeting it out to, millions of people. Just, they got a real dicey situation, which is why I think that they should try to nip this thing in the butt, because people will forget about it, just like they forget about everything else, because a news story will happen. But I just think the reason, like, baseball, basketball, they don't take as much. Obviously, baseball had their whole PD things, but they try so hard to, especially now, if something happens, they just nip it in the butt real quick. Forgot the guy's name on the Orioles that was suspended for the playoffs. Chris Davis, maybe? He gets suspended. Takes PEDs. Within 24 hours, he's suspended, 25 games, and then that's it. The quicker you get rid of these things, the quicker you just come up with a punishment, the more time you have to start thinking about the next thing. And people, question it for a day, they talk about the punishment, and then they move on. But the more we can just keep speculating on this and that and keep coming up with our own stories, the longer it's going to last. So,
exactly.
Listen, I don't know who's in charge of PR of the NFL, but if I was, I would just give them the punishment, whatever it may be, maybe even change it after the Super Bowl, but shift the attention to the game right now and not on cheating.
And look, far be it for me to say polarization doesn't hurt. I mean, look, when LeBron James was on the Miami Heat, people who love to hate the Heat watched. Those NBA Finals did big numbers. What's baseball's biggest problem? There's nobody polarizing because the Yankees aren't that good, and the sport's too slow. If you need someone polarizing, you need a villain. That sport doesn't have a villain. It's a dead national sport. I mean, it's a dead national sport. The NBA with LeBron James and the Heat, when they were the bad guys, oh, my God, everybody watched. The Lakers, who everyone loves to hate or loves, everyone wanted to watch. People, if you're polarizing, it's the best thing you can be, because people who hate you are going to tune in, and all that's going to matter is that people are tuning in. So to have two polarizing teams couldn't be better. But here's the thing. Forget about the ratings. If you're just talking about PR and if you're just talking about trying to sell the also very popular good versus bad guy stuff, these are both, to a lot of people in the national media and national fans, these are two bad guys going at it. These are two villain teams going at it. I find it very funny considering the NFL's been in a villainous light, I mean, since free agency of 2014. I've never seen anything like it, and it went into the season, and the NFL is on all these things about what it's doing wrong, and look, it's the most popular sport, but things are fragile. I'm not saying next year, I'm not saying in 3 years, but, what if this offseason's bad, and what if we have more of this bad press? Eventually, people don't like to support something that has a lot of bad press, and I'm one that subscribes to the theory that in 20 years the NFL is either going to be a different sport or an extinct sport, and things like this kind of tell me that this is what kind of starts that track towards it. I know that's heavy. I know this is an NFL show and we get the money from the NFL, but I really think that in 20 years that sport is in danger of either being completely changed or extinct.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Just like right now normally this is the best time for the NFL. It's where you're talking about the Super Bowl, you got the two best teams, you're talking about the players, what they did to overcome to get to the Super Bowl. The offseason, the day after the Super Bowl, there's always a player or two arrested on Super Bowl Sunday. Always. Yep. And then that kicks off the whole offseason of there was 72 arrests this offseason with 6 DUIs and, 3 domestic violence cases. Like, we're getting into the bad season of the NFL where it's all going to be negative news coming up. So the fact that it's already negative news, and it kind of has been all year, then we're going to push towards it even more in the offseason because I don't imagine that all of a sudden this offseason no one's going to be arrested.
Or there's going to be no concussion lawsuit spotlights.
Right, and then that's the next thing I was going to touch on. You're exactly right. And then we have all these concussion issues coming up and people dying from that. This league, I don't disagree with what you're saying. This league could be in big trouble. The way the players behave, the concussions, the safety of everybody it's
a lot of
the best place.
It's a lot of things. It's even, forget just that stuff. It's even bigger things. It's what if insurance companies don't want to cover high school athletics anymore? Well, football programs would be out because the school is not going to cover for the helmets and for the insurance policies. So if insurance companies are out, they're out. It's already happened in some states. You can read about that. Some high schools and some smaller colleges that got their insurance policies canceled, so there goes the football program. It's things like, the kind of this rift with the NCAA and it being looked as a feeder league and kind of more of that corruption. It's Little League participation being down, which is not good because in 10 years, if your future athletes in 10 years are basketball and soccer players and not football players, we've seen what happens to baseball. People like athletes. Baseball is not an athletic sport. People aren't watching. Basketball has a lot of athletes. People watch. Football has a lot of athletes. People watch. Soccer has a lot of athletes. People watch. People like to watch athletic specimens. If they're not in your sport in 10 years, you're in big trouble. Also, youth participation, youth love in soccer and basketball is up. Demographics like The Walking Dead outrating Sunday Night Football for a 3-week period among 18 to 49s. I mean, there's writing on the wall for a variety of different reasons. Former NFL players coming out, former Hall of Famers in your sport coming out saying they don't want their kids to play. There's a lot of things to look at to say, like, well, if you think this sport's not in trouble in 20 years, I mean, maybe it's not this thing, but I just think the collection of things, eventually something's going to happen. I mean, I just think that you got to be naive not to think so. And by the way, I think you and I are saying the same things. Not in 5 years. The sport's too popular to die out in 5 years. I'm talking 10, 15. People don't like to look at that, but I'm talking 10, 15 years, it's in trouble. Not 5 years, but in 15 years, I'd be shocked if it wasn't in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, and just the rules, the commissioner, he has players hating him. Like, they don't let anything happen fun anymore in the NFL where you can't, like, celebrate or do a dance. It's like, it's becoming just like there's all these problems and then you can't do anything fun and then there's ridiculous flags and there's always controversy. So, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you.
Well, we both agree on that subject. We went pretty heavy, but hey, it's kind of cool. I'm spice it up a little bit, and it's not stuff that fans don't know. Fans are pretty smart these days. But getting to the loser of the game, the Indianapolis Colts. We did it with the Packers. I kind of want your brief assessment on the. Obviously, we know. Look, and you can probably say this as well as me. The Colts don't play well. Haven't played well against the Patriots in the Andrew Luck era. They've been blown out every time by at least 3 touchdowns every time they played him. Their inability to stop the run and run the ball is what did them in here. Am I kind of right about that?
Yeah. I mean, it goes both ways, inability to stop the run and ability to run the ball.
Right, that's what I meant, yeah.
Yeah. So, it was just it was a complete two-way thing. They can't, obviously, one just ran all over them. And in the first matchup, Jonas Gray, who basically had one game all year he did anything, was against the Colts.
Right. I mean, it was pretty predictable.
Yeah, they could. And then, Andrew Luck, as good as he is, he took a little flack for this game, but I think most people realize, and I know people in Indianapolis realize, if you can't run the ball and people are sitting there playing the pass, it's
Right.
hard. It's hard to do anything.
Right.
The best quarterbacks all have a running game, at least a little bit of a running game. Aaron Rodgers has A. Lacy, he has Blunt, whoever else the Patriots want to throw out there.
And when you take away a guy's number one receiving option, when you take him out of the game, and when the guys who are supposed to step up because that number one receiving option, T.Y. Hilton, is taken out of the game, keep dropping balls for you. I mean, it was much more competitive in the first half, which is when Deflate-gate happened, and then ironically when the balls were up, Brady went crazy. But the first half, the game was a little closer than people realized because Andrew Luck was finding open guys. They just kept dropping the ball. I mean, look. You said it best. When everyone knows that they can't run the ball and that Andrew Luck's going to have to be dropping back all day, and then to top it all off, his number one receiving option is taken out of the game and everyone else keeps dropping balls, what's the guy supposed to do? I mean, the fact it's like when LeBron was on those bad Cavs teams and he had Mo Williams as the second best player and was bricking threes and he was getting triple teamed. Well, what's he supposed to do? I mean, there's only so much one guy can do in a team sport before you start to say, get him some help. I mean, I think is that the biggest story for the Colts this offseason? Get Andrew Luck some help?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I actually just completed a gallery that got approved today that I'm going to put it on Monday. 9 playmakers the Colts should go after in free agency or a draft. And they just need help. Obviously, they need a little help on the defensive side of the ball, but, man, just someone else, a running back, a wide receiver, someone to help T.Y. Hilton out. Like, they have Fleener, but Fleener sometimes disappears during games, Moncrief was supposed to be big. He disappears all the time. It's like they have these guys who sometimes get these big games. Like Fleener will sometimes, go for 7 and, 110 and a touchdown. But there's so many games he literally catches one pass for 5 yards. And they just don't have that consistency. If they can get another number one receiver to pair with Hilton, that would help Luck tremendously. And, they could be a real threat. And because their division is so weak that they're going to win that division again next year with ease, but it's not going to matter because the same thing's going to happen in the playoffs, whether it be the Patriots or whoever else comes up in the AFC. They're not going to have the weapons in one of those rounds to win the whole thing.
Two things for you. Number one, and you can answer this in whatever order you want, but number one, do you think that AFC South being as weak as it is hurting the Colts because the Colts are thinking they're better than they are, playing those teams and aren't getting enough real competition, at least consistently, especially if they're playing bad divisions? And then secondly, and you can answer whenever, besides playmakers, what other players do the offensive line, running backs, what other areas of the Colts team could they improve on besides the playmakers to help Andrew Luck?
Well, as far as the competition, I see what you're saying, but because they get the Texans, Titans, and Jaguars 6 times a year, one at home, one on the road, and they go 6-0 against them, which is 6 out of their 10 wins. They got beat up by all the superior teams. They got killed by the Patriots in the regular season. They got killed by the Cowboys in the regular season. They got killed by Pittsburgh in the regular season. I think Roethlisberger threw 6 touchdown passes against them. So all the playoff teams, they played awful against. So that should have been, the wake-up call. And I don't know whether they got it or not, but that should have been the wake-up call that they're not that good. And even in the playoffs, they got through the Bengals, but the Bengals are the Bengals. Like, God knows, prime time, Andy Dalton.
And they got 8 meetings at its worst.
They got to Denver, but Denver Peyton Manning was playing on one leg, and Julius Thomas was completely injured as well. So they got a favorable matchup there. So the second they get a team who's healthy that they have to really play, who's really good, they couldn't. So I don't think the confidence thing should have been an issue. I don't think they should be overconfident just because they didn't beat any good teams all year. So I don't know what would make them think when they go into the playoffs they're better because they beat up on Jacksonville and Tennessee.
I don't mean it that way. I mean, I know that not necessarily overconfident because they're blowing out Tennessee and being like, oh, yeah, man, look what we did in our division. But I'm saying more like, does that weak division not give them enough of a test? is what I mean.
Maybe they do get them 6 times, but they did, like I said, they did have those tests in the regular season. They did face teams just like everybody else. So obviously they didn't get those teams twice, and they initially get them at home or the way they wanted them and stuff. But I don't know. I feel like the tests were there. They just didn't pass the test.
So then what is it they need to do to help Andrew Luck out besides playmakers?
I mean, besides playmakers, they need to, really establish the running game, and they need to get some, guys on the defensive end who can stop the run. You can't just sit there and, I just don't think you can sit there and give up, 150 yards a game. They got to get somebody who can stop the run. And I think that's what they should look at in the draft is, a big guy in the end or a big guy in the middle who's going to clog it up and, help them with that run. They get to the quarterback okay, but they can't stop the run at all. So, I mean, they got to fix both the run game on both sides of the ball. And like I said, they got to get another receiver too. But I think they got to get a running back, whether they re-sign Bradshaw or go through the draft, or and then stop someone on the other end.
Do they need any upgrades on the O-line?
They do. They do need upgrades on the O-line because Luck did get beat up a little bit, but I think not any more than like really any other team, in NFL. Like everyone can use an upgrade because no one wants to see their quarterback get hit, but Luck didn't get hit like way more than anybody else.
What about the secondary?
Yeah, I mean they need another big play guy. They have Vontae Davis, who's basically at this point in his career, he's a lockdown corner.
Yeah, but he's a very, very good corner. But they obviously need someone to pair with him because I think other than Vontae Davis, I don't think that secondary is very good.
No, they need someone else to pair with them. You're exactly right. So they do have, they have some things obviously to go after this offseason, and I think for them it's very clear what they need because they obviously have the pieces and they have the quarterback, which
that's the most important thing.
The main piece. So I think they're in okay shape. Obviously, listen, they made it to the AFC Championship. Say what you want about their schedule and who they got, but they were still one of the last 4 teams remaining.
Exactly.
So they're close, and they've improved in his 3 years. They've gone one round, first round, second round, third round, every single year. So if you continue the trend, next year they're in the Super Bowl. Maybe they lose that, and then the next year they win. So it hasn't been awful.
That's kind of how we thought the Oklahoma City Thunder would be with Durant Westbrook, except they haven't been able to replicate it since that loss to Miami.
And they traded Harden, so.
Right, well, yeah.
That didn't help.
Right, yeah. You and I could go on forever about NBA. Obviously, as America can tell, we're big NBA guys. I love the NBA. I can't wait to watch more and more of it as football dies down. Although there's going to be a lot of off-season galleries, and you've got one. I've got another one, by the way, fans of this show, about 5 free agent Lions. There's 20 free agents the Lions will have. 5 of them I think they need to have back, and so I put that out recently. Zach is going to put out a Playmakers thing on Monday, so you guys can check it out. If you don't already, get the Fox Sports newsletters or go on foxsports.com. But Zach, before we kind of start to wrap the show up, maybe talk a little Super Bowl preview before we wrap it up. One last thing in your division, Jacksonville and Houston. We kind of know where they are, but Tennessee is interesting because they have the 2nd overall pick. Mariota, I'm going to ask the question that you already know is coming. Mariota or Winston? Because they're going to go with a quarterback, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that. And if I was picking for the Titans, I go for a quarterback. The Titans, and their bizarre world of being Tennessee and going 2-14 and keeping every single coach on the coaching staff and not getting rid of one single coach. They keep saying they are not going to go quarterback.
Really?
And they continue to say it, and I have a problem with that for a few reasons. My first thing is if Mariota goes first, I get not taking Winston if you're worried about the off the field trouble and you're worried about that's who you don't want to face your franchise. I get it, but it's still hard to pass up when you don't. If you're going to trust Zach Mettenberg, to be your guy who went 0-6 last year. If Mariota's sitting on the table, I think you're out of your mind not to take him. And my last problem with the Titans, who keep saying they're not going to take a quarterback, is if I'm Tennessee, even if I'm not going to take a quarterback, which fine, you do you, which is why you're 2-14. But if you want to continue down that road, I'd give off the perception that I'm going to take a quarterback no matter what, whichever one's left on the board, because there's so many teams that want to trade up to grab one of those quarterbacks, whether it be, the Eagles with Mariota if Winston goes first, or Houston who doesn't have a quarterback, or, I'm sure there's other teams there I'm missing too that don't have quarterbacks, but there's teams that are going to want to trade up. So if they keep saying, we're not taking a quarterback, and then, let's say Mariota goes first and they pass on Winston, teams aren't going to trade with them because they know Winston's still going to be there at 5 or 6 or 7, and then they're not getting any value out of it. So no idea what they're doing. I would go Mariota if he's available at 2, and then if Winston's available at 2, I go him too, because I think you can't pass up on that type of franchise quarterback. It's not like they drafted a first-round quarterback last year that they're trying to work with. They might have got a steal with Mettenberger. I don't know. But he was also a 6th-round pick. So if you didn't, or you want to, have him as the backup, I think that's okay. Maybe Mettenberger still starts this year for you, and then, there's nothing wrong with your first-round pick staying out for the year if he's in the right situation. But I just think it's too hard to pass up on a franchise guy like either of those guys. So they say they're not taking a quarterback. I think they're out of their minds. But I would take either of those guys. But I would take Mariota first if I had the choice, which they don't, because the Bucs will take one of the two.
I think you're, hey, look, I think you're right. They are out of their minds, and that was a good point you brought up about at least fake it so that you can get a haul from another team trying to trade up, which is exactly what the Rams did with the RG3 stuff. And look what they were able to haul in with from the Skins because of the Skins wanting to trade up. I mean, they were able to get picks that turned into Aaron Donald. I mean, you should go. They stole picks and great players from them, and they have a much better future, the Rams, if they can get a quarterback because of those great players, whereas the Skins mortgage their future on a guy who's injury prone. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That was a good point, and it is stupid of the Titans. They got to take somebody because I don't think Zach Mettenberger's the guy, but that's the weird world they live in. Speaking of the NFC West, Seattle in its 2nd straight Super Bowl, first defending champ to get back to the Super Bowl since the 2004 Patriots. They have the chance to be the first defending. The chance to be the first defending champion in the NFL to win a Super Bowl the year after they won a title since the 04 Patriots as well. Funnily enough, they're playing the Patriots, who might want their franchise to be the last to both repeat and get back. Well, they can't prevent the getting back, but at least to repeat. Hasn't happened in a decade, longest current drought in the NFL between repeat champions. So, Zach, I mean, we'll probably talk about this more next year, but before we wrap up the show, quick thoughts on the Super Bowl here. I think it's a good one. I think Seattle is in great position to win it again because I think that they're still young, they're still deep. I think this is the best chance to win it because next year when they start having to pay guys, I don't think they're going to be able to keep it going. So this is their chance. I'd like to see them repeat. I'd like to see another repeat champion. They're dominant. I like them, but I like the Patriots too. I think it's going to be close. I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots won. But I also think it's a good Super Bowl for that reason. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a good game. I think, Denver, started off bad last year, obviously, against the Seahawks, and they kind of fell apart. I don't see that happening this year with the Patriots. I think even if something happens, like, a botched snap into the end zone or like a pick six or whatever, the Patriots aren't going to quit like Denver did. And I think it's going to be a really good game. I got to admit, my biases are taking me to New England. Not that I like the Patriots, but can't stand Seattle, So I think
a Niners fan.
Being a Niner fan, just, Richard Sherman and me do not see eye to eye. So, I'm going to be rooting for the Patriots. I do think it's going to be a good game, but, if I had to pick a team, we'll get more into this next week as we really delve deep into this game. But, I think the Seahawks right now have the early edge. I think their defense is just really tough. And, say what you want, Russell Wilson is a winner. Like, he finds ways every game. He doesn't really lose ever in his career. And, pretty impressive. Even last game, 4 interceptions, whatever it was, and comes back and still ends up winning the game, making great passes too, like the over the shoulder to Marshawn Lynch in the corner, and obviously the last touchdown in overtime. He finds a way. So I do think it's going to be a close, good game, and I am looking forward to the game. But I think Seattle's going to win, but my heart goes with New England.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we'll get more into it. I mean, either way, I think this would be a good story. I don't have a dog in the fight, but this would be a good story for a couple reasons. I mean, look, New England, a 4th title after this, 14, 15-year run with that duo. I mean, say what you want. That duo's already solidified themselves as a Mount Rushmore for coach-quarterback duo, quarterback individually, coach individually, dynastic runs by a franchise, over a 10, 15-year period. I mean, whatever you want to look at, the Patriots with Belichick and Brady, they're there. I mean, you can't be – I mean, look, 14 years later, they're still contending for Super Bowl, so give me a break. It's pretty much not close that they're Mount Rushmore status. A 4th title would only make it more impressive. Seattle with the chance to repeat, though, is what I think is going to happen. Or Seattle repeating is what I think is going to happen, like you think. And, it's going to be a great game. It really is. I think that this has some parallels to 2013. Here we go with NBA again, but some parallels to 2013 Heat Spurs in terms of the Spurs, who are very similar to the Patriots in terms of having this prolonged run, trying to cap that run off against the defending champions. It has some Spurs Heat finals parallels to it, but we'll talk a little bit more about the game in next week's Extra Point podcast. I'm Adam Levin. Once again, the Sporting Mind of Adam Levin on Facebook, or mindofa-lev.blogspot.com if you want to read my blogs. Fox Sports, NFC North team pages and NFC North newsletters, and Packers, Lions, Bears, Vikings galleries on the pages. At Blue Collar God on Twitter. That is Zachary Benau. He is at Zach Benau. He covers the AFC South. He's got plenty of galleries on Fox, right, Zach?
A lot of galleries up there, yeah.
Yeah, so check them out. They're pretty good. I like a lot of the stuff he's doing draft-wise for the Jaguars and the Titans and stuff, because you know what? Hey, if you can make those teams interesting, then I respect that, and he does a good job with that kind of stuff. So till next time, I'm sure Andrew will join us next time, and his Patriots being in the Super Bowl, it will make it interesting to get his perspective on that. But thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you next time on the next Extra Point podcast. Have a good weekend.